Pick up a banana right now, not later, now. Feel the bend of it in your palm, the waxy skin, the slight give where your thumb meets the peel. Bring it close enough to smell it. That sweet, almost artificial scent is not flavor yet. It is chemistry leaving the fruit and entering your nose as airborne molecules. And the moment that happened, something you could not see and could not feel started inside your brainstem and your pancreas. It was still going minutes later. And the thing it triggered has nothing to do with potassium, fiber, or breakfast. Most people think a banana is the harmless item in the store, cheap, healthy, portable. The fruit you buy to prove to yourself you are being responsible before you wander towards cereal, yogurt, frozen waffles, and the aisle with the things you did not plan to buy. That story sounds sensible because bananas are sensible. They are curved, bright, soft, familiar. They are the least alarming object in the entire building, which is exactly why they are dangerous. Because the banana in your hand is not just food, it is a signal, a plant made broadcast system. A yellow cue, engineered by biology, standardized by ripening rooms, placed by retailers at the front of the produce department, and powerful enough that bananas became the number one selling product on Instacart, with more than 1.8 billion delivered and more than 32 million shopper notes attached to them. That is not normal fruit behavior. Source: you probably assume bananas sell because people need them. That is the folk explanation, and it is almost entirely wrong. What is actually happening is not simple demand meeting simple nutrition. It is plant hormone meeting mammalian reward circuitry inside a commercial environment designed to turn one small, healthy decision into a shopping state. The difference between hunger and purchase readiness is the difference between needing calories and becoming suggestible. One fills your stomach, the other opens your cart. That is why bananas matter. Not because they are expensive, because they are trusted. Not price, not nutrition, not convenience. Permission. Bananas are also not passive objects sitting there waiting to be chosen. By the time you see them, the fruit has already been through a controlled gas chamber. Ethylene exposure around 100 parts per million for about 24 hours, then 6 to 7 days in controlled rooms before shipping to retailers. More than 250 volatile compounds can be involved in banana aroma as ripening advances. You are not meeting fruit in the wild. You are meeting a broadcast that has been tuned. Here is the physics. A banana begins, in one sense, as a starch package inside a giant herb. Not a tree, incidentally. The banana plant is the largest herb on earth, but the part that matters here is the fruit and the gas. Ethylene. Two carbon atoms, four hydrogen atoms. C2H4. A tiny hydrocarbon with a double bond between the carbons, light enough to move easily through air and biologically potent at astonishingly low concentrations. This is the same molecule petrochemical engineers know as an industrial feedstock and plant physiologists know as a hormone. One molecule, two worlds. In the fruit, ethylene is not decoration, it is instruction. As banana cells mature, ethylene signaling turns on genes that accelerate ripening. Starch is broken down into sugars. Cell walls soften. Chlorophyll, the green pigment, degrades. Carotenoids remain visible, so the peel shifts toward yellow, reflecting wavelengths in roughly the 570 to 590 nanometer range that your visual system reads as ripe, edible, ready. At the same time, new volatile molecules are synthesized and released into the surrounding air. Those molecules matter because smell is contact at a distance. You do not need to bite the fruit. You only need to intercept the molecules it is shedding. Isoamyl acetate, isobutyl acetate, butyl acetate, isoamyl alcohol, elemicine. More than 250 volatile components have been identified in bananas, but the fruity top notes people instantly recognize come largely from volatile esters, especially isoamyl acetate. These are small carbon-based molecules with enough vapor pressure to escape the peel, move through the air, and reach receptors high inside your nose. That famous banana smell is matter in motion, source. Think about that. The yellow color and the smell are not two separate tricks. They are one ripening program expressed in two media, one optical, one chemical. A visible signal for your eyes and an invisible signal for your olfactory neurons. The fruit is announcing a metabolic fact. My starches are becoming sugars, my tissues are softening, my seeds would be ready if this clone had viable seeds, and now I want an animal to move me. That is what ripening is. Not beauty, timing. This was not obvious to the people who first saw it happening. In the 19th century, trees near leaking coal gas street lamps yellowed, dropped leaves, and aged early. Gardeners saw damage. They did not yet see a hormone. In 1901, Dmitry Neljubov at the Botanical Institute of St. Petersburg identified ethylene as the active component in illuminating gas that was deforming pea seedlings. He had found that an invisible hydrocarbon was altering plant growth. A gas was acting like an instruction. Source. That should have been enough to end the mystery. It was not. Because proving that external gas could harm plants is one thing, proving that plants make the same gas themselves is something else. That second step was stranger. Stranger because it implied a fruit could chemically command its own future and the future of the fruits beside it. In 1934, British biologist Richard Gain did the patient, almost absurd work required to make that visible. He collected the air around apples for a month, not a day, a month, around 60 pounds of fruit, and at the end of that long filtration, he had only 0.85 grams of ethylene, less than the mass of a paperclip, but enough. Enough to show that fruit was manufacturing the signal on its own, enough to connect street lamp injury, orchard ripening, and the ordinary bowl on a kitchen counter into one continuous mechanism. The ghost in the room had a formula: source, source. That discovery overturned the comforting folk story that ripening is just age. It is not age alone. It is chemical conversation. Bananas belong to a class called climacteric fruits, meaning their ripening is tied to a burst in respiration and ethylene signaling. Once that cascade starts, the fruit does not merely decay. It actively transforms itself. Sugars rise, texture changes, aroma blooms. The banana becomes more detectable to mammals precisely as it becomes more edible to them. And then humans industrialized that conversation. Commercial handlers place bananas into sealed ripening rooms with controlled temperature, humidity, ventilation, and air circulation. Ethylene is introduced, commonly around 100 parts per million, sometimes 100 to 150. The bananas are held for 6 to 7 days before shipment to retailers. In other words, the yellow arc you meet under supermarket lights was not simply harvested and displayed, it was timed. The signal was amplified on schedule. Source. This is not metaphor. This is physics. Think about that. Richard Gain deserves a pause here because his story carries the whole argument inside it. He was working in a world that had noticed the effect long before it understood the cause. Fruit seemed to hurry the aging of nearby plant tissue. Street lamps seemed to poison leaves. Smoke seemed to color citrus. The room was full of effects and empty of mechanism. Gain chose the least glamorous path possible. Collect air, wait, repeat, measure. There is a particular loneliness in that kind of science. No explosion, no telescope image, no dramatic apparatus, just patient accumulation around ordinary fruit until the invisible becomes undeniable. For a month he filtered the air around apples to trap what they were giving off. At the end, the amount was so small it would have been easy to call it nothing, but it was not nothing. It was the missing cause. And there is an irony in that. The man who proved fruit can manipulate other fruit with an invisible signal never lived to see that same signal become a retail technology. Ripening rooms, color stage management, impulse displays, app-level ripeness preferences. He explained the gas, he never saw the wallet. Let that settle. Now here is what that means for your body. The first mechanism begins before a calorie enters your blood. Sight and smell of food can trigger what physiologists call a cephalic phase response. Cephalic simply means the head is involved. The head sees, smells, predicts, and sends orders downward. Signals from sensory pathways reach the nucleus of the solitary tract in the brainstem, then the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus, and from there travel through parasympathetic fibers toward the pancreas. Acetylcholine is released. Muscarinic receptors on beta cells are activated. Insulin can rise before eating begins. Source. This matters because insulin is not just a sugar-handling hormone, it is also a signal of preparation, a shift from scanning to receiving. In a systematic review of human cephalic responses, the median insulin increase in studies that showed a response was about 2.5 micro-international units per milliliter, roughly 30% above baseline, at about 5 minutes after cue onset. The pulse typically peaks within 2 to 5 minutes and subsides within 8 to 10. Lars Sjöström and colleagues showed as early as 1980 that sight and smell of food could raise peripheral insulin, and atropine blocked the effect, implicating vagal signaling. Your body starts spending metabolic attention before you spend money. Source, source, source. That is the mechanism. There is a second mechanism operating at the same time. Food odors do not stop at the pancreas. They also move upward into reward circuitry. In 2017, Agnieszka Sorokovska and colleagues working through the Smell and Taste Clinic at Technische Universität Dresden and the University of Wrocław used functional MRI to compare brain responses to food and non-food odors in healthy people. Food odors produced stronger activation in the anterior cingulate cortex, the insula, and the putamen. Hungry participants also showed significant activation in the ventral tegmental area, one of the dopamine-rich nodes involved in reward prediction. Source. Dopamine is often misdescribed as the pleasure chemical. That is too crude. Dopamine is heavily involved in incentive salience, the process by which something becomes attractive, attention-grabbing, worth moving toward. The insula helps represent internal bodily state. The anterior cingulate participates in decision, conflict, and valuation. The putamen is tied to action, selection, and habit. In plain English, a food cue helps turn a store from a neutral space into a field of opportunities. Not fullness, readiness, not satisfaction, approach, not hunger alone, momentum. Think about that. And there is a third layer. Once the body is metabolically preparing and the brain is assigning salience, subtle retail cues begin to matter more than people think they do. Sensory marketing researcher Dipayan Biswas at the University of South Florida has shown that food cues can alter actual purchase behavior. In one line of work, ambient food scent shifted what shoppers bought. In another, healthy food sampling could paradoxically lead to more indulgent later choices when the sampled item felt categorically different from the next options, a kind of self-licensing effect. The body reads one small virtuous act as permission. Source. That is where the banana becomes dangerous, because it is one of the strongest virtue cues in the building. Yellow fruit in the front section, cheap enough to feel negligible, healthy enough to feel innocent, aromatic enough to prime the nose, familiar enough to lower suspicion. The difference between buying a banana and buying under the influence of a banana is the difference between choosing one item and entering a story about yourself. I am being good. I am shopping well. I can loosen up now. 3 mechanisms, all triggered by the same natural input, all operating below conscious awareness, all converging on the same behavioral outcome, lowered resistance to unplanned purchasing. This is not willpower. This is neuroscience. Now the money. Bananas are not a niche product. They are the most purchased produce item in the Packers Fresh Trends 2023 survey, bought by 63% of consumers polled. Walmart has repeatedly described bananas as one of its top-selling items, often the single best-selling grocery product in its stores. Instacart says bananas are its #1 selling product, with more than 1.8 billion delivered to date. Source. That alone would make bananas commercially important, but the more revealing number is not how often they are bought. It is how often they are bought unexpectedly. In a Tesco survey of 250 customers leaving stores in the London area, bananas were the most frequent item purchased that had not appeared on the shopping list. 71% of shoppers had vague lists that did not specify product names or quantities. Bananas were not just popular, they were the top off-list intrusion. The most innocent fruit in the store was also the most successful ambush. Source. For the average shopper, that matters because the banana is rarely acting alone. Industry people say this openly. Produce Business reports that bananas are the #1 single volume item in the produce department, often a loss leader, and a quality gauge for the entire store. Retail experts quoted there recommend keeping bananas at the front of the department because they demand the most floor traffic. They recommend secondary displays in checkout, cereal, dairy, pharmacy, and frozen sections. They recommend color stages 4 to 5 for maximum sales and displays 8 to 16 feet long. Source. Read that again in plain language. The banana display is not there because someone thought it looked cheerful. It is there because it moves bodies. A cheap, healthy-looking fruit is used to draw traffic into the highest margin decision environment in the building. The fruit itself may earn little. The downstream basket is where the money lives. That is what a loss leader means. Not profit on the object, profit on the sequence. AgroFresh, a post-harvest technology company, says the banana category is historically the largest retail produce category and that a prominent display draws customers into the produce department. Their guidance is wonderfully revealing. Keep bananas at preferred yellow color stage 5 or 6. Maintain visual appeal. Right-size the display for traffic flow because good-looking bananas can tempt an impulse buy as well as a planned purchase. If the display looks appealing, customers buy more bananas and feel more confident in the freshness of other fruit in the store. Confidence spills. Carts follow. Source. The system is elegant in a slightly predatory way. First, the fruit is chemically timed in sealed ripening rooms. Then it is visually staged at the exact color customers prefer. Then it is placed where traffic is highest. Then its cheapness removes financial friction. Then its health halo lowers moral friction. Then the rest of the store receives a shopper who feels prudent rather than primed. Not accidental, not decorative, not harmless. Architectural psychology. There is a second retail layer hiding inside that. Produce moved near store entrances measurably changes what people buy. In a PLOS medicine trial, making fruit and vegetables more prominent and placing produce near the entrance increased store-level fruit and vegetable sales by the equivalent of about 6,170 extra portions per store per week at 3 months and about 9,820 at 6 months. Total grocery spending did not rise much in that specific intervention, which is important and honest, but it proved something retailers already behave as if they know. Where fresh food appears first, changes the pattern of decisions that follows. Source. Bananas dominate that doorway economy because they are unusually cooperative merchandise, year-round, bright, stackable, familiar to children, familiar to adults, soft enough to imply ripeness, firm enough to survive handling, cheap enough to ignore, perishable enough to create urgency, and their smell leaks. Apples can be quiet from a distance, bananas are not. Now the digital layer. Physical stores discovered long ago that banana ripeness affects buying. Online retail has turned that into interface design. Instacart built a specific preference picker that lets customers choose banana ripeness from not ripe to almost ripe to ripe. Bananas also generate more shopper notes than any other item sold on the platform, more than 32 million. That means a fruit once managed by touch and smell in a produce aisle has become a stream of preference data. Ripeness is now a retention feature. Source. And once that preference is digitized, the old biology does not disappear, it scales. The platform learns whether you buy bananas for immediate eating or future eating. It learns whether you shop aspirationally or operationally. It learns whether a yellow cue keeps you engaged. One fruit, millions of preference signals. The banana is no longer only a produce item. It is a behavioral probe. Think about that. So what does it cost? The banana itself is cheap. The Bureau of Labor Statistics lists a recent average U.S. retail price around $0.653 per pound. If an off-list banana purchase is about 2 pounds, that is roughly $1.31. On its own, not terrifying. Even one off-list bunch every week is only about $68 a year. Source. But that is not the real number. The real number is banana plus sequence. If the banana primes just one extra unplanned adjacent purchase of, say, $4, and that happens only twice a month, that is another $96 a year. Add the bananas themselves and you are near $164. If it happens weekly, you are closer to $276. Not because bananas are expensive, because cues are. That is an estimate, yes. But it is an honest one. The fruit costs coins. The state change costs dollars. Think about what that means for your life. The cephalic insulin data sits on the top shelf. It has been directly measured in blood, reviewed systematically, and tied to vagal signaling, even though the effect is variable and sometimes small. The fMRI evidence that food odors activate reward-related brain regions also sits high on the shelf. That has been measured directly in human brains. The retail evidence that banana displays are deliberately managed for traffic and confidence sits on a solid shelf too, because the industry states it plainly. The idea that a ripe banana specifically, by itself, causes a certain dollar amount of extra spending sits on a reasonable middle shelf. It fits the biology. It fits the merchandising. It fits the impulse purchase data. But your personal number depends on how often you shop hungry, how rigidly you use a list, and how easily one virtuous item licenses the next indulgent one. The viewer should know which shelf each claim sits on. So go back to the banana in your hand. A few minutes ago, it was just a curved yellow fruit. Now you know it is a plant signal timed by ethylene, colored by pigment loss, scented by volatile esters, detected by receptors in your nose, translated by your brainstem, amplified through dopamine-linked circuits, and placed in stores where that chain can influence what reaches your cart and leaves your account. Nature writes the cue, biology reads it, retail monetizes it. That does not make bananas evil. It makes them efficient. A banana is dangerous in the grocery store for the same reason a whisper can be dangerous in a quiet room. It does not need to be loud. It only needs to arrive at the right moment and change the next decision. So here is one thing to do. When you reach for bananas in a store, stop for 10 seconds before you move on. Not a mindfulness ritual, a circuit breaker. Put both feet still. Read your list out loud in your head. Ask one physical question. What did I come here to buy after this fruit, before this fruit told my body a story? Then keep walking only to the next listed item. 10 seconds. Not discipline. Interrupt the cue.